So here we are again at the Trans-European Division offices with Dr. Daniel Duda, President of the Trans-European Division. And we're come to the third interview on the values of the Trans-European Division. You remember the first value, extending love, the second value, growing disciples, and the third value, creating communities, growing communities and people groups. Daniel, let's unpack what that means.
I think we need to start back where we finished the last time, so with discipleship. So if followers, we are not in the business of producing followers, so if followers become committed Christians, is this what we want? Are they going to be people who are just producing or reproducing what they are like? Do we expect them to care about people who speak another language, who are less fortunate, who are on a different social status or ladder than they are? Do we expect them to be more loving, more gracious? Or do we just replicate the community that they have, and that it will be more of the same?
I'm used to being around people who are like me. I want to be around people like me. In fact, I run into the danger of being into a place where people think only like me. You're saying that's not a good place to be. You need to reach out to people who are different for the sake of the gospel.
Yes, but this is not only true sociologically. So if you only associate with people who are like you, we create this confirmation bias. With social media, the news and the suggestions of stories that is provided for us is what we like. So the probability that we are going to like it is very high. But here we are talking about the discipleship. Remember, Jesus has Matthew, the tax collector, and he has a zealot. And he says, the two of you are going to room together as we walk on the dusty roads of Palestine. Can you imagine those discussions late into night? Because he has different types of people. Because together we are stronger. We are created in God's image, and by our diversity we enrich, enhance one another. And we are also reaching out to people who are different. The problem with associating with people who are just like us is that only people who are similar to this are attracted to that type of Christianity. And look with the polarization of society in America, how this is becoming a major problem. And even here in Britain, the Brexiteers and the Remainers and the political alliances. Now, you want people to feel comfortable in that church, even if they have different political views, even if they are a different race, different nations. Have a look at the potluck. For me as a guest speaker, it's interesting, but you realize most of the food is of the same type as the prevailing culture in that church. How do people who are minority in the church feel in that community as a representation on a platform, 50 Sabbaths per year, or at the potluck?
So the gospel, the call of the gospel, is the antidote to the echo chamber, because Jesus said, go.
That's right. And because it always calls us out of our comfort zone. Every culture is broken. Every culture has problems, and every culture has something positive, because ultimately God is behind that, or the original point, we believe, is from God. And so there needs to be this melting pot and this interaction between different cultures, different temperaments. Look, God created us as males and females. He created us as introverts and extroverts. How many people on the Sabbath morning are typical extroverts? And there is an introvert sitting in the pew, and is there something for them in the service as well? Do they have something to contribute? And then we have different temperaments, whether you take the 4 major or the 16 or how many, whichever model you go for. And then we have spiritual gifts, so that the variety is even increased. God gives you, when you are born into God's family, different spiritual gifts. None of us has all, because we need one another, and we help one another to see things we would not see otherwise, and to serve and be served.
We have a history of churches or church planting, and many of those plants are replicas of the mother church, if you like. Either church splits or hive-offs, and they replicate the character of the mother church. That's not really church planting, is it?
I mean, it's better than nothing. However, it does not reach out to a new group of people. We are going to talk about new people groups. We are going to talk about new places. So if it's just a mirror or carbon copy of what was there before, then it might be the defiance, it might be the dissidents, or people who have been hurt and burned in the local church because of toxic environment. And they start a new church plant. And sometimes it's just, these are now, for the first time in the history of Christianity, we are going to create a perfect community, perfect church, where we don't have to put up with all these difficult characters. So here is the bad news. God is going to send intentionally some difficult people into your life, because He's more interested in shaping your character, in your holiness, than in your comfort. So if the church planting is an attempt to escape that, it's not going to be successful. As all those people who wanted to create, oh, let's not deal with them because they are so hopelessly liberal, so narrowly conservative, or you name it, whatever. We are now going to have the community of perfect people, and you discover where people are, it's not perfect.
The other issue when it comes to church life is that I become a consumer. I want to go to the church that feeds my soul, my wife's soul, that has facilities for the children, that has what I call the padded pews. That's very different to creating new communities, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. So consumer's mentality, and we live in a part of the world where this is a prevailing culture. Give me more, better parking, better sermons, better service. Yeah. That's why so many former churches are converted into pubs. They provide better service.
So we can't pretend for 1 minute that if we engage in creating new communities, it involves sacrifice.
In Europe, we do not have a problem or the privilege of having mega churches. However, if you look at the American society, 1% of churches are mega churches, yet they have 20%, close to 20% of people and resources. And often the result is that if consumerism is the driving force, people then contribute less, they volunteer less, sacrifice financially less. Now, of course, this is not to disparage them. They are committed Christians in the mega churches like everywhere else. But it's easier to be anonymous, and not much is required of you because you like more the show and the quality of the production. While in a small church, you are more visible, and people are expected to contribute to the services and to be actively involved. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
So you cannot be a spectator. And
it's more difficult to be a spectator.
And so when you go into a new community and start a new group, a small group or a new church community, you are actively engaged from day one.
Yes, and in TD we have 1,180 churches, but we have 88,600 members. That means the average church in our territory is about 75 members. That means that people live in a medium or smaller size church, and they are involved in that type of ministry. Now, with church planting, you do not have the spectrum of lifelong disciples. Last time we talked about discipleship being not one-off, not something that you experience emotionally because you had this wonderful experience of conversion with God, but that becomes a lifelong experience. In the recently finished TD Combined Advisory, one of the requests from church leaders and local churches was to provide more multi-generational worship, so that in the post-COVID world, all groups of people are involved. And this is where the traditional churches have an advantage over the church plant, that you have more spread of people in different stages of faith. In a church plant, except for a couple of leaders, you have people who are mostly on the same stage of development. And it's not easy to provide then that perspective, which you can if you have established church. So both the traditional churches and the church planting have their advantages and disadvantages. If we don't care about another group of people, and that's why you speak about growing communities with new people groups. Take, for example, Denmark. 74% of population are members of or claim to belong to the state Lutheran Church. In Finland, Norway, it's 70%. In Sweden, 57%. We still need to do something, some church planting there, because there are new people groups. If you take a larger city, you might have 2 Adventist churches there, but more or less they are a carbon copy of the same, and they reach more or less the same target audience, instead of concentrating on new people groups.
Let's talk about the sort of people groups in Europe that we could connect with. So, for example, there are ethnic people groups. These are one type of community, right?
Sure, and they have their place, because when people are displaced, when they are in a new condition, a new social situation, immigrants in a new country, they are going to flock with people who are just like them. They will help them to provide jobs, to provide support, and they will feel comfortable in their similar environment. Of course, the problem there is that they try to preserve whatever they remember from back home, and then it happens that here we are 40 years later in one of the culturally most diverse cities in the world, London, after New York, and people still preserve that Adventism that was back home 50, 70 years ago, while Adventism there has moved on. Because the disadvantage of that national church is that they try to preserve the way we did it back home was the way how Jesus approved it and how it's supposed to be done.
Another type of community group is youth.
Yes.
And youth want to worship different, they want to do church differently. Do they have permission to experiment?
Depends the permission from whom. So it depends on the maturity of the local church. If they want to be community where everybody is welcome, then they need to see and will see that they need to provide some space for these young people. That they are not rebellious, they are not loving Jesus less, they just express their faith in a different way. So I think all those churches who give them this permission, they have seen that it brings growth and brings a level of satisfaction, while those who just keep the tradition as it was always was, discover that young people don't identify with that type of Christianity or Adventism.
And you would agree it's essential to give these youngsters permission by their mother church or wherever for the sake of the gospel and contextualizing it to this generation?
Of course it is, because God doesn't have grandchildren. Christianity needs to be contextualized in each generation, in each culture, anew. And that's why it's so important. And as we said in the beginning, by bringing this diversity, everybody benefits. So the older generation sees the new vibrant expression of faith. They see commitment, that they are not worse than they were when they were young. They were as rebellious, they just forgot it. It's the selective memory.
So I don't want to lose that. So however uncomfortable new worship might be to me as an oldie, it's actually going to be a blessing to me.
Of course, I mean, probably we are going to talk more about communities than the worship, but if worship is too predictable, then it doesn't engage you as a human being. So there needs to be a level of unpredictability, of newness to the worship, so that yes, if it's completely unpredictable, people never know what's coming next. So there needs to be a traditional part or a predictable part, and there needs to be a new part that, this is different, this is new. And it opens your eyes for things you have not seen before, and God can speak to you in ways and touch you in ways that you did not expect. You have the sense, living God is in our midst.
I can't avoid this question. Permission to try and reach majority populations in countries where the majority Adventist population is in a minority. Could we have permission to do that?
Permission from whom? by His Great Commission, Jesus gave us that permission, so we don't need it.
Sorted. Thank you. Right, okay.
Because otherwise we create an impression that somebody doesn't want to give. Now, of course, each church has its own dynamics. My predecessor, Rafat Kamal, used to tell this story, how he arrived in a local church and it was only him and the elder. And the elder proudly says to him, you know, I have to tell you, I have been an elder here for 25 years. And so Rafat says to him, so you must have seen a lot of change in that period of time. And he said, yep, and I opposed every one of those. So in that church, you need a permission, and most probably you are not going to get it. But let's say this is a toxic situation. And so 1 Corinthians says that it's God's will to provide spiritual gifts for every situation. So there are other people who could be the elders and who have more open mind to give that permission to the rest of the community, because this type of leadership is not biblical, it's not sound, and it's not producing lifelong discipleship across generations.
We believe in loving people. We believe in growing and maturing as disciples. We believe that the outcome of discipleship is going.
Yes.
Imagine the Trans-European Division 5 or 10 years from now. What would it look like in terms of growth, both depth and breadth?
That it would extend to people that we are not reaching now, because we are replicating people like us. So yes, we have the national churches, and there the important part is to meet together with other churches, different families, once, twice a year, have a day of fellowship, so that you have the sense we are one family, we belong together. Because otherwise, 52 Sabbaths a year, you see only people like you, and you feel that God is only at work in your community, or even doubt it sometimes, and you don't see the dynamic which is in the body of Christ. So the future will be that the Holy Spirit is not our private property. We see that He's not only working in us and within us and through us, but He's working around us. So there will be new types of people who are reached through the gospel, and new expressions of what it means to be engaged in mission, a committed, lifelong follower of Jesus.
And finally, what is the place of the Holy Spirit and the supernatural activity of the Spirit in all this?
According to the New Testament, it's part of the reality. It's the heritage of deism and secularism, that we somehow live in a universe that everything is normal, everything is natural, everything can be explained by natural causes, measured, and just fall in love, and you see there are certain things that cannot be explained, that cannot be measured and grasped, and suddenly you see the reality is much bigger. And this brings us back to what we are talking about, because the essence of ultimate reality is God who exists in relationships as a community. That's why ultimately extending love and growing lifelong disciples needs to produce new communities in new people groups and in new places. When you said going, or when you said go, Jesus actually in Greek didn't say go. It's not an imperative, it's a participle. So wherever you go, whatever area of life you engage in, whether you are a housewife or a mother, whether you are a pensioner, whether you are a nurse, whether you are an IT person, in different areas. Otherwise, we create the impression that go means that you need to go to the opposite side of the world. Now, of course, there's a place for that, but there is something that each one of us can contribute wherever we are without leaving the city where we live or changing the profession. Not everybody needs to be a pastor or a co-porter to be in service of God, because we serve in the New Testament with our spiritual gifts.
Daniel, thank you for talking to the TED News today. A privilege as ever.
Thank you, and blessings to all our listeners and viewers.
And if you want to stay connected with the work of the Trans-European Division, we invite you to go to the website ted.adventist.org, where you will find news, reviews, devotionals, articles, and messages to inspire you in your life as a Christian.